It's time for the Week 10 edition of the Whole 9 Yards. Hello, everybody. I'm Ralph Ventre, excited for the fact that Week 10 is here. The stretch run is upon us. By the time the month of November is over, an NEC champion will be crowned. There are two unbeaten teams left in NEC play, Wagner and Bryant. Both of those teams will be on opposite ends of the NEC Football doubleheader on ESPN3 this Saturday. Robert Morris is idle, but the 6 other NEC teams are in action. Let's run down these matchups with our no-huddle preview. Leading off, it's homecoming weekend in Loretto. It's an all-Keystone State clash between St. Francis and Duquesne. Here's a little nugget for you. Did you know that 2 members of the Duquesne coaching staff are former Red Flash? Duquesne defensive coordinator Dave Opfar is the former St. Francis U head coach, and Duquesne quarterbacks coach Anthony Doria was the second leading passer in NEC history during his days as the Red Flash's signal caller. Anyway, moving on to the actual matchup that will unfold on DeGaulle Field in Week 10. Duquesne has won 5 of the last 6 in this series, but the Dukes won't take St. Francis lightly, especially after the Red Flash won at Sacred Heart in Week 9. St. Francis won last week despite Kahari Dixon being held under the 100-yard mark. Despite failing to hit the century mark for the first time this season, Dixon is still the national rushing leader in the football championship subdivision. And you better believe he'll pose a challenge for the Duquesne D. As for the St. Francis defense, Daquan Minter and Lorenzo Jerome both picked off passes in last week's win at Sacred Heart. It's likely that Minter, Jerome, and the St. Francis secondary will be rather active come Saturday against the pass-happy Duquesne team. The Dukes love to pass and are pretty good at it too. They average an NEC high 8.1 yards per pass attempt. Their dynamic receiving core is led by Chris King, who leads the entire FCS in receiving yards and receiving touchdowns. King's 12 receiving touchdowns are only 4 shy of the all-time NEC single-season record. That's 16, and it was set by former Duke wide receiver Connor Dixon. We'll see if King can add to that total Saturday in a game that will air live on NEC Front Row. Now on to the NEC Football doubleheader on ESPN3. Bryant and Central Connecticut will kick off the double dip starting at noon on Saturday. That's Eastern Standard Time. The Bulldogs are one of 2 teams without a conference loss this season. Meanwhile, the Blue Devils, Saturday's opponent, are still looking for their first conference victory. But records mean nothing to Bryant running back Ricardo McCray.
Well, like you just said, they are 0-3 in the NEC, but that doesn't mean a thing. Any team can be beaten any weekend, and beating 2 CAA teams is no easy task. So you know Central Connecticut can play. So we just have to go in there ready to play at our full capability. And it's going to be a tough game. We know this is going to be a grind, but we have to be the team that grinds harder throughout the whole game if we want to come out with the win.
McCray also has a great deal of respect for CCSU running back Rob Holloman.
Speed kills is the first thing I'm going to say. Rob is a very fast back, very elusive, and I think that's 2 things that make him very successful here in the NEC. He finishes with his head forward, he finishes downhill, and that's always great to see in a running back.
Whoever does a better job stopping the run will likely be in position to win this one. After all, the Blue Devils did beat 2 CAA teams in non-conference play this year. In both of those victories, Rob Holloman rushed for more than 160 yards. Meanwhile, Bryant employs a 2-headed rushing attack featuring McCray and Paul Canaveri. Those two gentlemen combined for over 300 rushing yards in last week's win over Robert Morris. The second half of Saturday's doubleheader on ESPN3 will unfold on Staten Island, where 2-0 Wagner will host defending NEC champion Sacred Heart. This is a key matchup for the NEC title race, as Sacred Heart will have a chance to get back on track following last week's loss, while Wagner has a prime opportunity to establish itself as a serious contender. Sacred Heart shouldn't have a problem getting motivated on Saturday. The Pioneers were upset at home last week, and they also probably remember last year's last-second loss to Wagner. Here's what Sacred Heart head coach Mark Nofri has to say.
We talked about it last night. You put it behind you. You know it's a tough loss. A lot of people were upset, including myself, and you got to realize that everything that happened on Saturday is fixable. The kids did so resilient. They played well at times, but you want to be more consistent and not being able to turn the switch on and off when you want. And they know that it's a 3-game series right now and starts on Saturday down at Wagner Field.
Wagner's recipe for success has been defense this season. The Seahawks surrendered 10 points or fewer in 3 of their 4 wins on the year. They'll have a tough task slowing down Sacred Heart on Saturday, but Wagner quarterback Jared Judon looks forward to that challenge.
They remember what happened last season. We know that's going to play a factor into the game. And I know that they're going to come in here and they're going to try to get a win because they need one. So we definitely have to play our style of football. We definitely have to play lights out, mistake free, and stay focused during the game and just worry about what's happening on the field between those lines. And we should be okay. We should be fine.
Saturday's matchup on Staten Island will feature the top 2 teams in the NEC in terms of run defense. Sacred Heart and Wagner are both holding opponents to fewer than 100 rushing yards per game. Jared Judon knows that if you're a defensive back in the Northeast Conference, you better be able to stop the run.
The Northeast Conference, every team usually has great backs. And like you said, Rico's one, and we're coming up against one this upcoming Saturday. So being a cornerback and playing in the run defense, sometimes you have to beat the block and you have to make that tackle, because that tackle could be the tackle for a loss. It could be a big play tackle. And if you miss it, it can also be a big play where you might be the last line of defense.
Yo, I need a Twitter timeout. This week's featured tweet comes from our man Horton. He's an NEC football fan, and he was obviously watching last week's Game of the Week on ESPN3. As you can see, he was rather impressed with St. Francis U quarterback Zach Dreyer. But what he forgets to mention is that Dreyer wasn't just a passer and a punter, he was also a receiver, as he pulled in this 33-yard touchdown pass from wide receiver Anthony Abai. Thanks for the tweet, Horton, and we hope that you'll be watching again this weekend as we have an NEC doubleheader on ESPN3. Now, before we break, let's take a quick look at some X's and O's. It's time to feature one NEC player on the offensive side of the ball and another star on the defensive side. First, defensively. You've heard from him already in the program today. How about Wagner cornerback Jared Judon? He was an All-NEC pick in 2012, helping Wagner to the Northeast Conference title and an FCS playoff win. This season, he's leading the Northeast Conference in interceptions. He had 2 picks in last week's win over Central Connecticut State. He's a veteran leader who has great ball skills and can also stop the run. Offensively, we shine the spotlight on Central Connecticut State wide receiver Terrell Holmes. Holmes was a preseason All-NEC pick, and he's playing like he's worthy of that title. Holmes averaging more than 15 yards per catch this season. He has more than 500 yards receiving. This past week, he went for 165 yards for the Blue Devils. He's not only a team leader, but he's a dangerous weapon in the CCSU passing attack. So there you have it, NEC fans. Week number 10 is upon us. 3 ever-important conference matchups. Duquesne and St. Francis will air live on NEC Front Row, and also, of course, our NEC Football doubleheader on ESPN3. Bryant and Central kick it off. Wagner and Sacred Heart finish it out. It should be a very exciting day in Northeast Conference football. I'm Ralph Ventre for the whole 9 yards. We'll see you next week, and enjoy the games.